How many of you have ever been under a bad leader? Yeah, some of you have scars from it. Some of you have maybe, how many of you are currently under a bad leader? You got a double hand. Oh, man. We're going to pray for Mike. This is all for you, buddy. You might want to just take the HTML here and just send it over to your boss and by anonymous. We're going to be talking about a bad leader here and what makeup it is. You know, the book of Judges has a bunch of heroes. These are guys that God raised up to help deliver the children of Israel. But chapter 9 here, we see a zero. This guy, Abimelech, the son of Gideon, is a terrible leader. He asserts himself into this position. He rules by anger and force, and he leaves, when he dies, an absolute mess. But that's hard to deal with when you are underneath that. And some of you have been through that, and it's difficult. If I could encourage you with this, and that is that you may have bad leaders, but we have a great leader in Jesus Christ. And as we look at Jesus in comparison to these things, we find such a different style of leadership, something that's so attractive that we're drawn to say, Lord, I want to be more like that in the people that I'm influencing, the people that I'm over, whether I'm a boss or a supervisor or I'm just a parent with my kids, because that's an influence of leadership as well. We want to learn these things. And so it's good for us to study bad leadership so we know what not to do, right? We want to note those things, and that's where we're at in Judges chapter 9. It is a long chapter, so let's dive right in, and we're going to pull out some applicational things. We're going to be seeing this morning 6 marks of a bad leader, or the agony of the Abimelechs in our lives. Chapter 9, verse 1. Then Abimelech, the son of Zerubbabel, that's Gideon, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Zerubbabel reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. And his mother's brothers spoke to all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, and their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, He is our brother. Now in chapter 8, verse 30 and 31, we find that Gideon had 70 sons by many wives, and then had this concubine in Shechem, and she bore this son Abimelech. Abimelech's name means my father is king. And Gideon is now dead, and Abimelech goes to his uncles there in Shechem and says, Hey, can you help me drum up some support, and I will be your leader. It was really a prideful move of entitlement. You know, that's where he's at. You see, in chapter 8, verse 23, if you'll note there, Gideon was asked to rule over Israel. Gideon, you've delivered us from the Midianites. Oh, be our ruler. And what did he say? He said simply, I'm not going to rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. And that was the desire, that let the Lord be the one to direct your steps and lead your life. But Abimelech ignored that, and he steps in, wanting things his own way, to have power over people, and the men of the city said, Hey, sounds good to us. But anyways, 6 marks of this bad leader to take into consideration. Number 1 is that bad leaders are often prideful and feel self-entitled. Entitled to things. You will find that over and over, because that's the first thing we note about Abimelech. Here is this man full of pride. He's ambitious. He's craving power over people. He feels he's got a right to things, and he uses his upbringing to get that. It's been said that God wisely designed our bodies that we can't pat ourselves on the back. So what do? In pride, we get others to do that for us. But that's how the Lord designed it. He also designed us that we can't kick ourselves too much in the rear end, right? But the Lord has a sense of humor. But I think it's so important for us to be careful and to stay away from leaders who end up tooting their own horn. Maybe you have been underneath those leaders, and it sounds something like this. You know what I did to get here. And they tell you this long story of how great they are. Or something like this. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have this job. Or my family started this business, ... And you find those things pushed out there on you. It's really a prideful move and a sense of entitlement. When you look at Jesus, you see the opposite. The Bible says he came not to be served, but to serve, right? He was a servant style of leadership. He never felt entitled to certain privileges, though he was God. He said at one point, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man doesn't even have a place to lay his head. I mean, if anybody would feel entitled, hey, I need a bed tonight, I need this, I need that, you should do it. It was God. He's God. But he didn't. In fact, what's amazing about him, in John chapter 13, it says he knew who he was, he knew his mission, he had loved them to the end, he knew where he was going, and so he set aside his garment, grabbed a towel, and there washed the disciples' feet. Wow. He won men to the kingdom by his heart to serve them, not feeling entitled, not taking a prideful route. Vance Havner said this. He said, good leaders have a magnet in their heart and a compass in their hand. Think about that. A magnet in their heart of passion for God and a compass in their hand for direction. In verse 4, check it out. So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. So they give him a kind of startup cash, and he uses it to go hire hitmen, as we're going to see here, to secure his position. Number 2, bad leaders surround themselves with worthless and reckless company. You can kind of tell sometimes when you're looking at somebody in a point of leadership, look who's around them. Look at their decisions and how they lead others and the people they surround themselves with. It says a lot about their decision-making skills. Do they surround themselves with men of integrity, men of honesty, or is it just kind of shady deals and shifty characters? You see, it's not about the amount of people. It's not the quantity, it's the quality that matters most. Does this leader have a heart to learn to be wise or just to be liked? Some leaders are in a place where all they want is yes men. You ever had a leader like that? And what I mean by yes men is all they want is people to tell them how good they are and yes. They never have anybody stand up and say, well, maybe you should think about that. Maybe that's not the best route to go because maybe they're afraid they get fired. But does the leader surround themselves with people who are going to compensate their inabilities, that the team is going to work well? Abimelech's not doing that. He's looking for guys that are going to take his heart to just rule and crush people along the way, and these are hitmen. Look at what David said, Psalms 101, verses 6 and 7. He says this, my eyes will be on the faithful in the land, that they may dwell with me. The one whose walk is blameless will minister to me. No one who practices deceit will dwell in my house. No one who speaks falsely will stand in my presence. I like that. From one who was a leader to say, here's who I want surrounding me. I want godly men and people of integrity who are going to go forward and continue to produce and do good things through these. So that's important for us. Jesus, again, that great leader, he surrounded himself with common men. They were fishermen, tax collectors, one zealot, but he changed them in the process. They followed him not to do sin, but to do righteousness. And in the process, they're seeing the character of God displayed, and the Spirit changes their lives. Look at verse 5. Abimelech now sets out to secure his position. Look what he does. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Milo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. So they crowned this ungodly king in the very place that Joshua told the children of Israel about the covenant with God in Joshua chapter 24. These people are blatantly just ignoring God's word and doing what's right in their own eyes. But how can a heart get so hard that they're willing to kill off their family to secure a position? I mean, that's pretty low. It was said of Herod the Great, who, when Jesus was born, that he killed off his whole family to secure his position as king. It was said it was better to be his pig than to be related to this guy. Because literally, you had a better chance of survival of being a pig than being related to him. And people just trembled at Herod when he got upset because he was hothead Herod, and it was a mess. But this reality is, in the midst of it, Abimelech's vile act God is allowed something to happen. The youngest son of Zerubbabel, that is Jotham, he escapes. How? And verse 5 tells us that he hid himself. And there are times when you have to hide yourself from the hothead. There are times you have to hide yourself and flee and get away, and whether it's for the day or whether it's for a season, you need to be away from that because it's so destructive in the process. If you don't, you become another case in the file of dead dreams and dead people that he crushed. I've been in that situation. When I was over in China, I was underneath this leader, and he was not a good leader. He was very hothead. He was very problematic. A lot of people ended up in tears. It was just he was very manipulative, and it was a very difficult time, but I found myself just staying away. I didn't want to volunteer for things because I never knew how he would respond. At one point he came to me and he says, "Hey, I want you to sign these papers." I said, "I can't even read these papers. They're in Chinese. I'm not signing these things." And he just kind of grumbled and complained. Another time he came to me and says, "I want you to go and get support from me and tell all your supporters what they need to do." And I said, "I'm not doing that." And it was challenging. I just kind of stayed away because I knew that character, and I heard from others just how forceful and manipulative he was with people. Well, 5 years after I got back from China, it's been 10 years, but 5 years later, we were talking with somebody, a acquaintance in the process, and this guy got arrested. He got arrested for fraud and embezzlement. And I thought, you know what? I am so glad I didn't sign papers, and I'm so glad I just stayed away. My name is nowhere in connection with that. And so you do have to walk wisely. At times, hide yourself in those times. Because number 3, bad leaders will do whatever it takes to stay in charge. They're even willing to destroy their own families so there's no challenge to their leadership. Good leaders know what God's called them to do, but they hold it a little bit lightly because, in a sense, you realize whatever God's calling you to do, it's all God's first. Listen, you are defined not by what you do, but who you are. You are first defined, you are a believer in Jesus Christ. He doesn't look at you and go, well, you're this, you're that. No, you're a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ. And so because you have that identity, you can rest in the fact that whatever he tells me to do, I can do it lighter than holding on to my identity. If you get it reversed, where you're holding on to what you do is who you are, it's going to be a mess. But when you hold on to who you are, then what you do has a light touch to it because ultimately you know where you're going and you know who you belong to. Jesus, as a good leader, you see, at times he could have called down, remember he was in the garden, he could have called down a legion of angels to defend himself. He could have done that. He could have done that to stay in charge, but he said what? The Father's will was more important than even his comfort. And if Jesus, the Son of God, can say, Lord, Father, your will be done, more than my comforts in escaping the cross, then we should have the same approach to say, Lord, it's your will to be done. I don't have to hold tightly to things. I can have a loose grip because I know they belong to you first. Your will is done. 69 brothers have been killed. He got what he wanted. God wasn't pleased. Look what happens next. Verse 7. Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out, and he said to them, listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. So God spares Jotham to use Jotham. At times we go, well, why did God spare my life? Well, just wait and see. God has something he wants to use you for. And he stands on Mount Gerizim, and it's just across from Shechem. It was the place where Israel, when they came into the land, there was 2 mountains. There was a Mount Gerizim and Mount, I think it's Ebal is the other place. But one was a place where they pronounced curses, and another place where they pronounced blessing, and Shechem was right in the middle. Jotham's heart was not ill will in this. He wanted the people to learn from the Lord. He wanted the people to walk with the Lord. And now he gives this parable to them. Look at verse 8. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, should I cease giving my oil with which they honor God and men and go to sway over trees? And the trees said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit and go to sway over trees? Then the tree said to the vine, "You come and reign over us." But the vine said to them, "Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees?" And all the trees said to the bramble, "You come and reign over us." And the bramble said to the trees, "If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out from the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon." This is the tall tree tale of truth. Say that quick a bunch of times. But in what it talks about is here you have an olive tree and a fig tree and a vine. They all knew their purpose and their role, what God had designed them for. And they all said, well, why leave to do something we weren't designed for? And really good leadership knows those limits and says, I want to be productive and beneficial for the people around me. But what happened is the trees, which represent the men of Shechem, they wouldn't give up. And so they accepted low character in a bramble, which represented Abimelech. Now, that's like a thorn bush. There's no shade there. There's no usefulness there. You're not going to make anything out of a thorn bush. You're just going to use it for fire. When do trees find shade under thorn bushes? They don't. It's illogical, but that's where these men were at. And so Jotham says the fire is going to come out and devour you both. Look at verse 16. Now, therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house and have done him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. But you have risen up against my father's house this day and killed his 70 sons on one stone and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Milo, and let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Milo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech, his brother. So he basically gives him a heart check and says, hey, what's your motive in making this guy king? If your motives are pure, which they weren't, then, hey, rejoice in it, have a great time because you made the right move. But if your motives are wrong, it's going to backfire on you. And how true that is. How you start will probably be the way things end. And I think that's important for us to consider because sometimes if you end up pushing others out to get ahead and just to climb the ladder of success, guess what happens? You end up playing king of the hill. You've got to push out and push down everybody else that's gunning for you now. It's been said that man's kingdom, built by man's ways, has to be sustained by man's hands. But God's kingdom, built God's ways, is sustained by God's Holy Spirit. It's such a different approach than our world has. But how you start out probably ends up being the way you end. And leaders who push down to maintain control ends up bad, in a bad place. Good leaders know who's in control and lean on the Lord. So Jotham gives his word, and then in verse 21, runs for his life because he knows that this guy's gunning for him now. Look at verse 22. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled, and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who aided him in the killing of his brothers. And the men of Shechem sent men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along the way, and it was told Abimelech. So sometimes people think, oh, no, Jotham, we're all good here. We're all getting along. This is all good. That won't happen to us. 3 years pass by, and guess what? God starts stirring this ill will. Bad blood in the camp is happening between them. You see, it may take 3 years, 30 years, but God's word will come to pass, and it's something for us to note. He sent this spirit of ill will. Things begin to turn. First, there is treachery. This deception is taking place. Self is on the throne, wanting its way between Abimelech and these men of Shechem. Secondly, there's robbery in verse 25. They start putting guys to ambush along the roads going into the city and start taking out his business, profits, you might say, and stealing from him. And then in verse 26, there's disloyalty. Now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. Gaal means loathing. Maybe this guy's a little bit younger. Maybe he's just more handsome. I don't know. Maybe he's more energetic. Whatever it is, these people said, whoa, hey, Gaal, man, that's the guy. Let's go with Mr. Loathing rather than the ramble man of Abimelech, Mr. Melech. He might call him, whatever his name is. And so their loyalty, they pledged to this guy Gaal. It was a loyalty by convenience. When they pledged it to Abimelech, it was only out of convenience. Until something better comes along, I'll follow you. And man, that's the heart oftentimes. Gaal the Great came into town and said, hey, let's throw a party for him. Abimelech never got a party. He's probably a little bit jealous. Watch what happens. Verse 27. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from the vineyards and trod them and made merry. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal the son of Ebed said, who is Abimelech and who is Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Zerubbabel, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. And so he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. Drunken men say stupid things and invoke fights. And that's what's happening. Maybe you've seen that in your own life. Verse 30. When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are, fortifying the city against you. Now therefore get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be as soon as the sun is up in the morning that you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity. Zebul is Abimelech's officer, is kind of the city manager. He heard this rant. He was there at this party. And now he tells Abimelech, hey, come and bust some heads. Prove yourself that you're the guy in charge. Now Abimelech's got to defend his name. Verse 34. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. And when Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood at the entrance of the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, you're just seeing things. He said, you see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men. And Gaal spoke up again and said, see, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth tree. Verse 38. Then Zebul said to him, where indeed is your mouth now, with which you said, who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Are not these people whom you despised? Go out, if you will, and fight with them now. So Gaal went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech, and Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech dwelt in Armah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers so that they would not dwell in Shechem. So Gaal sees these 4 companies coming, and they're coming to attack him against Shechem, and now it really is the rubber meets the road. And Zebul says, hey, you think you're all that in a bag of chips? Let's do it. Let's see what you got. And so he invokes him into this battle, and in the end, Gaal goes home really with his tail between his legs, and the men are hurt in this whole thing, it says there. It's often the case. You find that people who become really self-driven and make stupid remarks, you're going to hurt people in the process. And that's what happens here. There's destruction and shame and disgrace all along the way. But with the rising opposition, how are you going to respond? And this is the 4th thing. Bad leaders get angry and forceful when they're opposed or challenged. They fight their way to get their own way. You see, God gave you this emotion of anger. It's not a bad thing. He wants you to be angry about sin. He wants to be angry about sin, but holding to righteousness. We want to be angry about sin for the glory of God. But so often our anger leads us to sin rather than from sin. One of the tests of a good leadership is to find out how people respond when they're challenged. What happens when they're challenged, when they don't get their way? Do they flex their muscles and by force, put people in place? Do they threaten to manipulate or fight to get their way? Do they refuse to repent? It's been said when a man's temper gets the best of him, it reveals the worst of him. So true. Jesus, again, going back to his example, he often just walked away. At one point, they were so mad at him, they wanted to throw him off of a hill. Another point, they wanted to stone him. He just walked away. Now look at a difference. James and John one day were sitting in the city of Samaria, and they were so frustrated with the people, they said, "Hey, Lord, would you call down fire from heaven and just nuke these guys?" Jesus says, "You guys don't know. Give it up, man. Not our mission, boys." And so you see such a difference with the Lord. Men get frustrated. It's often that we want to control. Jesus walked away. He knows he's coming to judge sin. But we have to consider that not every battle is worth the fight. If you haven't discovered that yet, take that little nugget and put it in your back pocket. When you feel like you have got to defend yourself with every battle because your reputation's on the line, and if you don't, people are going to get the wrong impression, and people are going to say this and that, you're heading down a wrong road. You don't have to fight every battle. In fact, as a believer, let God fight the battles for you. Stand in your integrity and in your honesty and just do with the right heart before the Lord and let him take care of the results. It may all fall apart, but you'll still know you did what was right before the Lord. Verse 42, let's keep going. And it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. And he took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the company that were with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city, killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sowed it with salt so that there's no other vegetation that could grow there in Shechem. Now when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god of Berith, and it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, and he and all the people who were with him, and Abimelech took his axe in his hands and cut down a bow from the trees, and it took it and laid it on his shoulders. He said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." Verse 49, so each of the people likewise cut down his own bow and followed Abimelech and put them against the stronghold and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died. About how many? 1,000 men and women. Wow. Abimelech continues to fight people who oppose him. And really, there's such an agony. How often we see uncontrolled anger just rip apart lives. The city of Shechem is basically destroyed, and he's forcing himself. He burns that down. People are killed. The city is salted. And then he goes to all the people that ran away. They ran away into this tower. And so he says, "Yeah, we'll take them down too." And he goes and he grabs wood, and they stack it there, and they burn this thing down, and 1,000 people died. He is burning as he goes. The warning from Jotham is coming true. Abimelech will burn you, and it's coming to pass here. But number 5, bad leaders burn up others and bring them down. They're just in their rage, they're burning people down. They leave ashes in their ruin. Their lives are destroyed. It's all about them. They really don't care. There's a lady that came to the evangelist, Billy Sunday, one time, and she said this, trying to justify her anger outburst. She said, "There's nothing wrong with losing my temper. I blow up, and then it's all over." And Billy Sunday said, "So does a shotgun, and look at the damage it does." It's how true. Don't let anger be your trademark. In fact, keep your temper, it's been said. Keep your temper because no one else wants it. Keep it to yourself. Jesus, what a good leader. He comes with grace for those who are broken, those who have been burned by life, those who have been, scarred by others. He comes with such grace to restore. Peter, who has failed him miserably, he restores him. The harlot that's been ready to be stoned, he restores him. The leper that's been outcast and shunned off, burned by society, he embraces. We want to be like Jesus. We must be careful that the heat of anger doesn't move us towards unrighteousness. As Abimelech is raging, God put his downfall. Look at this, verse 50. Then Abimelech, because he's hot-headed, he just wants to take everybody out. He goes to Thebez. Thebez is 10 miles away. You'll find hot-headed people will go to whatever extent to make sure that hey, people know I'm the guy in charge. So he goes all the way to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. There was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the top of the tower. So a strong tower was a place of safety in a city. When an enemy attacked, you would go to the tower, and that gives you the advantage to look down. So they all went into this tower. They're probably hoping that Abimelech kind of cools his head off. Some people, they just need some space. Maybe he'll just walk away and he'll be fine. But look at what happens. Verse 52. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it. And he drew near the door of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. So in pride, he goes up to the tower. I've done this before. No big deal. I'm going to huff. I'm going to puff. I'm going to blow this house down. And a lady takes an upper millstone. Now I want you to understand the millstone. I got a picture of it for you. The upper millstone was probably about 200 pounds or so. Probably her, I don't know, she's squatting this thing or what, but she's just probably got some guys to help her. She goes up in the tower, and she's like, bombs away. Lands on the guy's head. And listen, this is like taking your lawnmower up to the top of your house and throwing it down on whoever, the robber, the bad guy. I mean, literally a splitting headache, if you're thinking about this through, but nails him right on the head. She drops this. What an ironic situation, because Abimelech killed his brothers on a stone, and now a stone is dropped on his own head. You reap what you sow. God finds a way. But here's the lesson. How do you deal with anger when it's consuming you, when it's burning and raging and taking out people and cities and everything around? I love it, because I think the parallel is you take the rock of Christ. And the name of the Lord is a strong tower, and the righteous run into it and are safe. And you take the rock of Christ and you drop that puppy on your sinful self of anger. You take the grave, that tombstone there, and you say, here's where new life begins, and I'm going to crush it. I'm going to crush the old ways. It's exactly what Ephesians says, Ephesians 4. Verse 31 and 32, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. And be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ and God forgave you. So there's the letting go. Lord, I'm dropping you on this issue of anger. Crush it. And then I'm going to pursue after you, Lord, in righteousness and holiness. Let's see how it ends. Verse 54. Then he called quickly to the young man. He's not dead. 200 pounds falls on his head. He's not dead. He just got a cracked skull. He calls quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed him. This guy's bad. So his young man thrust him through, and he died. He's trying to hide his shame of being taken out by a woman and not a fighter, of having a farm instrument thrown on his head rather than a sword. He's trying to cover himself. And so in his last dying words, he's only considering what people are going to say about himself. That's where his mind's at. Not, man, I really messed up. No, hey, man, run me through, because I don't want people saying this about me. What a sad thing. I think it's better to change our ways while there's time than to wait until our deathbed and try to rewrite the story. Verse 55, look how it ends. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man to his place. Two results. The first one is this result in 55. Bad leaders are going to leave a mess of sin behind them when they die. They've killed off the family. They've burned the cities. They've left people lost and just picking up the pieces. A nation is torn apart. They're remembered, but they're not remembered for anything good. You remember David's son, Absalom. Another one, terrible leader. There was a man who pushed his way in, a man who promoted himself, a man who promised things to people. Hey, if I was king, this would happen, and this coup arose within the kingdom. Well, in the end, Absalom found himself hanging by his beautiful hair in a tree. He was poked through like a piñata, hanging in the air. And it was said the only thing that he had for himself, the testimony he left, was that he left a statue, in a sense, of himself, a pillar erected to himself. What a terrible legacy. What legacy are you going to leave behind? Is it going to be ashes and ruin, my trademark is anger and all that stuff? Or is it going to be about the Savior and how he saves? So the first result was that the mess is made. The second result is a reality here in verse 56 and 57. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers, and all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned on their own heads. On them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Zerubbabel. The reality is that God's word stands true. If we're not going to heed his warnings, we're going to have to face his consequences. God tells us there's a judgment for sin. And you know what? God can take care of maybe those leaders that are off. Sometimes in this life he does, but definitely in the next he does. If we would heed his warnings, we'd probably save ourselves a lot of headaches, rocks being thrown on us, right? We'd save ourselves a lot of turmoil and even a witness that's terrible. The men of Shechem burned with rage against Abimelech, and Abimelech burned with anger against them. And in the end, it all leaves a mess. Maybe in your life, you've been underneath some really bad leadership, employers and bosses. Maybe you've felt the headache of things happening that, have caused such anguish in your own heart. I want to tell you there is one you can trade jobs right now. Go work for Jesus, the greatest leader of all. And I'll tell you, he will embrace you, and he will bring you in, and he'll love you. Because while a bad leader looks to burn people down, Jesus, our good leader, always came to build us up, to save us from our sin, to rescue us, to give us life for death, and forgiveness where we blew it big time.